My name is Corey Kaufman, and I am the HCM representative for the Public Sector User Group. This afternoon, we have Sierra-Cedar presenting on unleashing the power of the cloud. We have Tim Gehrig, who is the EVP for Cloud Management Services, and Dan Fry, the SVP for Security and Strategy. Just a couple housekeeping items before I pass it over to Sierra-Cedar. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the Zoom webinar chat, or you may use the Q&A. We will hold all questions until the end, and there'll be plenty of time to get your questions answered. We will be recording this webinar, and it will be available, sent out after the webinar has completed. And with that, I will pass it on to Sierra-Cedar.
All right, thank you very much, Corey. Thank you, Nancy Ruoff, for scheduling this. And thank you to the Public Sector User Group. And I look forward to spending some time with you today. I have some really, I think, timely and thoughtful information to share. And with that, let's get right into it. So the topic for today is PeopleSoft on public cloud, specifically AWS, but we're going to have a sprinkling of other cloud topics in here as well. From this webinar, there's 4 main points that I'm expecting that towards the end you are going to get out of it. But you know, with anything here, as we get into this content, please write down questions that you may have. Please put them in the Q&A. And we are definitely interested in going any other direction that you want to go with this once we get to the Q&A section. But in terms of the 4 main points, first of all, organizations like yourself are moving to the public cloud, right? It's happening, your cohorts are doing it, and there's very tangible reasons why cloud migrations are occurring, both from the perspective of from security gains, performance gains, risk mitigation in the form of security and cost guardrails, lots of very, very important benefits to the cloud that are actually being realized. So we're going to talk about some of those today. Next thing is that, you know, the migration to public cloud, especially for traditional infrastructure, can solve some of the problems that public sector organizations are facing today around labor, around resource constraints, those types of things. So we're going to talk a bit about that, how you need to think about resources in this new age of cloud, and provide some guidance based on what we're seeing ourselves and what some of our clients are seeing that we're both helping with and are just partnering with today. So lots of good information to share there. We're also going to introduce a topic called everything is cloud, everything is code, or infrastructure as code. It's a new concept that is gaining traction in the market. It definitely came into its own with the introduction of the public cloud, and it's something that I want to spend some time on, because not only can it transform the way that you think about infrastructure, it can really start to address that, even that second key point about managing labor constraints going forward and figuring out where you're going to need help and where you're not in this cloud ecosystem. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then at the end of the day, point number 4 is you don't have to go down this path alone. There are partners that can help you. There are other public sector organizations that have gone down this path that I'm sure are extremely happy to share their information and help you. This is not a scary path. It's a path that's going to require a lot of learning. You know, some change is definitely a part of the equation, but it's a fun path, an exciting path to go down with some very, very practical business benefits that are realized on that journey. All right. So about us, this is the only slide that you get about us. I guess actually at the end of the presentation we have one more slide. Oh, we have one more slide that's got a little bit more information, but it should be pretty interesting. But we've been doing this a while. The public cloud journey for us started probably 4 to 5 years ago. We've spent a lot of time looking at different public cloud solutions and frankly tackling some of the challenges that we're going to talk to you about today ourselves. So I will definitely share that with you. And within the cloud management environment, just in general, we've been working with organizations and outsourcing applications into private cloud environments since probably going back early 2000s. I think we started around 2001. So a lot of the same challenges that organizations are trying to solve today with migration to public cloud, we've been involved with in one shape or the other for going on the past 20 years. So these new public cloud challenges are new, but in some ways they are very relevant to a lot of the experiences that we've had historically. All right, so we've been doing this quite a while. In terms of today, my name is Tim Gehrig. That's who you're speaking now. This is definitely a journey I've been on with our organizations and with our partner organizations since we got started looking at public cloud. And right along with me is Mr. Dan Fry. He's our SVP of Security and Strategy. And Dan as well has been very involved in this cloud journey from the get-go. Dan brings a really unique perspective to this conversation. And Dan, I thank you for joining me today. Because Dan's world of and viewpoint on security is really interesting and actually brings that whole concept of risk mitigation right back around with the public cloud showing tangible benefits. So he's going to talk first about that, and then we're going to jump into a little bit more about the other cloud topics that I was discussing earlier. And just as an FYI, I think I skipped right past the agenda slide, which Dan's smiling at me. So let's just say the agenda is going to be a little bit of a surprise today, but it's going to be all very relevant to this cloud journey that you're learning about, that you're on, and definitely look forward to sharing this with you and looking for your Q&A as we get going. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn the call over to Dan Fry for about 5 or 6 slides, and then he's going to hand it back over to me. Dan, tell us why organizations are moving to the cloud, please.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. So there's 4 main reasons that we have seen clients want to go to the cloud. The first is good old top-down strategy. It's generally some kind of organizational-wide imperative that's coming down from a CTO or a CIO, and they view cloud as kind of a prerequisite to be competitive in the market going forward. So it's faster time to market, different ways to engage with customers. Could be different speed, agility, anything that is driven from an overall broader business sense. The second way is a tactical, and that's generally a much more responsive, immediate need where we've had an issue in a data center, and rather than rebuild the data center, we're going to stand up or recover infrastructure in the cloud. It could be driven by resource limitations. We don't have enough servers. The time to spin up servers is too long. So we want to move some of our lab environments out into the cloud as a temporary measure. So the 2 ways to kind of differentiate between the 2 is one is much more proactive and the other one is much more reactive. The third way is kind of an opportunity where you know that you've got an upcoming spend or an upcoming capital project, whether it's hardware refresh cycle, or you're in PeopleSoft 9.1, you want to go to 9.2, or there's some new type of application, you're getting ready to roll out a fluid interface. And it's a great opportunity to revisit how you're running the environment today and how you want to run it in the future. Maybe there's some benefits to moving to cloud. And then the fourth way is that there's just the good old grassroots expansion. Somebody on your team heard about AWS. They think, hey, this sounds kind of neat. This is cool. Let's go play with it. And then it slowly gains steam. And then all of a sudden it's turned into either a tactical imperative or a strategic one. But there's a fifth reason to go to cloud that kind of developed last year. So last year was somewhat interesting and stressful from a security perspective. There was a significantly large number of local and state governments that got hit with ransomware. It's about 70 plus. At the beginning of the year, what you saw was a relatively low ransom amount. So City of Atlanta got hit. I think their ransom was somewhere around $50,000, and then a couple months later, the cyber attackers kind of realized, hey, wait a minute, we can ask for way more money. So you had a much smaller city that was asked to pay a much larger ransom than what Atlanta was. So the cost of ransoms were increasing. The second was putting on my security hat, kind of a, yep, saw this one coming. Where because they have access, the cyber attackers have access into a network, they're like, well, if we're here encrypting and ransoming data, we might as well steal a copy of it while we're at it. you know, kill two birds with one stone. So if you look at these ransomware attacks as financially motivated criminal attacks, then, you know, it's kind of elementary that they are going to try to maximize the amount of profit that they can gain from the attack. And this was exactly the case that happened to Allied Universal. So they refused to pay the ransom. The attackers said, great, well, we stole a bunch of your data. We're going to put it out on the internet. And that's exactly what they did. Now, the impact to the organization is that it turns the incident from being just a malware recovery type exercise where I've got to go and re-image machines that might be infected. I've got to maybe restore some data that's been encrypted into a full-blown data breach type scenario where now I've got to make notification to, you know, state, local government, district attorney's offices, to trying to quantify exactly what data was taken, how far they had penetrated into the network. So it becomes a much bigger, broader problem. The third kind of component that started to develop late last year was that the ransomware is really starting to target backups and backup copies of data. You know, one of the primary ways to recover from a ransomware attack is to just restore the data before it was encrypted and ransomed. Some of the newer ransomware is deliberately trying to interrupt that backup process. So they'll go into Microsoft Windows, for example, and delete some of the volume shadow copies and make it much more difficult to recover data, which motivates organization that's been affected to go ahead and pay the ransom. And ultimately, that's what they're after. So I had an interesting conversation with a couple folks from Oracle in December of last year, and we started talking about ransomware. And somebody made the comment that City of Atlanta's Hyperion system, which was hosted in Oracle's cloud, remained online and was available during the ransomware attack in City of Atlanta. Another gentleman from Oracle that was at the meeting made a comment about City of Baltimore and their Salesforce cloud was available during an attack. And the comment that I made back to him said, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Ransomware is generally spread via email. Desktop PCs don't or can't really spread malware to a website unless that website has a particular vulnerability. So by moving things into the cloud, you're reducing your blast radius for an on-network type security incident. So that was kind of where we left things, and we both kind of all agreed that made sense. Then there was a comment by Gary Brantley, who's the CIO for City of Atlanta, and he said, you know, we have started making a transition towards cloud services, and then we had this ransomware event happen, and now we've accelerated and increased the amount of cloud services that we are starting to use within the City of Atlanta. Now, I do much better with pictures, and when I drew this out just to kind of wrap my head around it, all of a sudden a light bulb kind of went off. I'm like, wow, this makes a whole lot of sense. You've got a whole bunch of critical apps that are essentially in one basket before taking kind of an older traditional view of how enterprise applications were hosted. And then if you go look at a bunch of SaaS services or infrastructure as a service and moving some of your ERP or critical applications out to that, you have effectively isolated each of those applications from the users and from each other. So you have to find vulnerabilities in not just one application, but all of the applications. It's not no longer becomes I just have to get into an organization's network and take over everything. I have to get into each one of these services, and if each one is properly architected and built, you can significantly limit your blast radius. So unfortunately, all of the evidence that I have is very anecdotal instead of statistical based, but I think one of the interesting things that we'll see develop with much more clarity this year is exactly how much risk does a SaaS or an IaaS service mitigate for an enterprise or an organization. I think that'll be another driving factor this year and maybe next on why SaaS services will continue to accelerate within the marketplace.
Thank you, Dan. And what's interesting, and I don't have a slide in here on this, is one of those where as we were putting this content together for you, we decided to leave it out, but it was essentially one of those diagrams that listed the chasm, technology chasm, and how different industries are adopting. And what's interesting for commercial industries, they're very well down the path. The higher ed industries are kind of jumping over the chasm to cloud as we speak in a pretty aggressive form. And then within state and local government and government in general, you guys that group is still a little bit on kind of the I'm getting ready to jump side. The early adopters have jumped in, but right now you have a lot more interest building, which is generating a whole lot more questions, which is one of the reasons that we're talking today and sharing information with you. So let's talk a little bit about this cloud journey and AWS. And I thought I'd start with this slide here. And this is really just a slide that indicates that, based on survey results, we do a survey every year of a bunch of HR organizations, 1,892. I was about to say, definitely more than 1,000, but a large number of organizations. And one of the facts that I pulled out of that was that a good chunk of them are looking at migrating PeopleSoft, particularly, or ERP applications out of traditional data centers into public cloud. You're part of that, as well as for those looking to do it, AWS is the leading vendor of choice. There's certainly other providers doing this today, but as we'll kind of go through here, AWS for us is a very, very good place to land with this, and definitely got lots of good information to share and use cases to talk about that demonstrate that. All right, so let's first talk about the way to migrate applications. I've only got 2 slides to cover this, and I did cover this in a previous presentation on a similar topic. So for those that have heard this before, I hope this helps reinforce. For those that did hear this before, also I hope this adds some new information to kind of the discussion. And essentially what you have is 2 primary methods to move applications to the public cloud. One is lift and shift, and this is a term that you will hear a lot. That's that rehost option, lift and shift. I'll call it lift and shift. And what this is essentially is picking up an application out of a traditional data center. If you can kind of visualize it, shifting it over and dropping it into the cloud data center. It's fairly easy. It is fairly quick in terms of ability to do it, especially when you're in a situation where tactically you have to do something. And it's relatively low cost, respectively, to go ahead and move that application. Where it becomes expensive is with the ongoing management of the environment, because in a lift and shift model, you leverage very little of the actual cloud native technology that you're migrating into. Really what you're doing is you're leveraging the cloud's compute. Same thing you're doing in a traditional data center. The downside, which will be shown you on the next slide, is that all of the operational challenges that your organizations have solved problems for in the last 10, 15, 20 years, maybe 30 years, in the traditional data center, things like patching and compliance and security and recovery and all these kinds of terms, you got to solve all those all over again. The cloud will help you a little bit in terms of getting there if you do this migration via lift and shift. But generally speaking, you're going to have to solve a lot of those problems again, which creates risk, creates costs, and creates a kind of a longer term management challenge for you guys. The other path is replatforming. And this is where you lift, tinker, and shift. And the way to think about this is all those problems that I mentioned already that you have to resolve in the public cloud. If you take the time and you lift and tinker and shift, you solve a lot of those problems by essentially leveraging native cloud technologies as you migrate applications into the public cloud. I can get a lot deeper on that just in general. I'm going to stay pretty high level in this conversation. I really just want, from a takeaway perspective, is if you look at the next slide, just to understand that there is a way to migrate into the public cloud that will really enable you and drive value for your organization. And that is encompassed in 2 things. Number one, leveraging cloud native services wherever and however possible. So really understanding what that means to your organization is important, and investing time in training and learning to that end is very important. The other concept that I'd like you just to understand, or just to hear at this stage, is that the other half of that equation is the leveraging of automation and orchestration technologies associated with a concept, guess what, called everything is code, right? This is what we talked about earlier. And this is essentially taking a data center concept and breaking it down into code. And if you can do that in conjunction with re-implementing applications in cloud using cloud native technologies, which again, I can get into a whole lot more detail on another presentation with you on that topic specifically. But you can do those two things and invest the time into those two things, you will not only migrate to cloud and check a box for your organization, you will be adding an immense amount of value to what will ultimately be a platform that you'll leverage more broadly across your organization outside of ERP. So this is really a transformational moment for your organization to, whatever that application is, whether it's an ERP application or another type of application, if you go down this process of replatforming that application into public cloud and learning about what that means, you will set yourself up for a large amount of success as you move forward. And then lastly, in this section, this just touches on, this slide touches on this concept of automation and orchestration. We've invested heavily in this ourselves. This is something that you can also invest in yourselves. But it just gives you a visual of all the different types of things that you need to take into account that are probably already taken into account within your traditional data center that now you have to do in your cloud data center. And there's a right way and I won't say a wrong way, but there's a right way and a quick way to do it. And the quick way does not always yield you the long-term benefit of cloud or long-term benefit of cost savings or risk abatement that kind of going down an orchestration and infrastructure as code path can get you. All right, so there is that. And then let's talk about PeopleSoft on AWS, right? So what I just got done talking with you about was, I wouldn't say specific to AWS. These are generally cloud concepts. All of the cloud providers, whether it's AWS or Oracle or Google or Microsoft, they're all going to have their unique flavor of the different types of cloud native services they're going to provide to you. And they're all going to offer a different type of path to consider for a replatforming path. But I just wanted to make sure that we got that out of the way in terms of concepts, because it's very important concepts to, if you're not fully on board with understanding them at this stage, that you lay that into your your next steps in terms of learning and education. All right, but now I want to switch gears and talk about PeopleSoft and AWS. And to start there, we've got several use cases we can talk about. Certainly our friends at Kansas State University went through a kind of a multi-tiered process of learning in AWS public cloud. They've been very successful. They're a type of organization that first started in a very tactical way in going to public cloud. They had an event within their data center that created a need to get to public cloud very quickly. I think the period was about over 48 hours. They had to go from about 0 to production in about 48 hours, and they were able to accomplish that in public cloud. And that was a project that we ended up helping them with, and we were very honored to be a part of that. But that was, again, a very tactical situation, right? So they're forced into it. But then they went through a process of learning about what it kind of meant to go to public cloud. And now they're kind of all in on the AWS front and investing in that heavily within their organization, and they're seeing results from it. But to get there, it also took steps in learning about these different types of concepts that I'm going to share with you now. So the first thing is, within the public cloud, especially with PeopleSoft in the public cloud, you need to rethink how you design infrastructure, both in a couple ways. The first way is a concept that I touch base on this on the next slide as well, but it's that concept of whether you go isolated versus shared architectures, or modular versus shared architectures. I think I used the word modular on the next slide. But essentially what this is, it's kind of viewing your infrastructure as one big data center, so one big blast radius, as Dan would say it, or multiple smaller blast radiuses, right? So you have the opportunity in public cloud to rethink how you actually design your infrastructure, including with PeopleSoft, which is pretty great. Traditionally with PeopleSoft, in traditional data centers, you typically set things up in big ways. So you buy big servers, and you scale big servers, you add CPU, and you add RAM. You treat it as big infrastructure, right? In the public cloud, you can not only separate out your blast radius between even your different pillars of PeopleSoft, so you can have a separate data center for all intents and purposes for your non-prods. You can have a separate one for your productions, so that if you have an issue within one particular environment, then that issue is isolated to that one particular environment. All right. You can also redesign how your applications run in those environments. So, you know, I give you like a good example of one of our very big clients. You know, in our traditional data centers, where we traditionally hosted them, they had application servers that were extremely large and served very large volumes. Well, when we migrated that application, PeopleSoft application, into AWS, we completely rethought it. We said, all right, this is probably not the right design for AWS, because in the public cloud, you want the ability to scale, right? And if you want the ability to scale, you got to keep things modular, you got to keep them small, so that then you can leverage the technology in the public cloud to do the scaling for you. So now you're not scaling by adding CPU or adding memory to different types of servers like you would in a traditional data center. Now you can build smaller modular components and scale them up as quickly as you need them. And that's kind of the concept you see here on the screen, where it says traditional data centers, it takes you, let's say, days to get some scale to a particular application. In AWS, you can literally do it in minutes. And this, you know, again, goes back to leveraging those cloud native concepts. But if you do that, you can completely rethink the way you design these applications and run them in a very cloud native way and get a lot of value out of them for your organizations. The next slide, again, just reiterates that concept of modular versus shared architecture. It goes back to rethinking how you actually deploy configurations and applications within public cloud. PeopleSoft is a great fit for AWS. It really is. You know, it was built in a way, designed in a way back in even the 2000s to leverage modular concepts at the web and the application tiers. And those scale very well in the AWS infrastructure. So they work well, they scale well, assuming, of course, they are designed well. And this is something that, again, as you go on this journey and you consider PeopleSoft as one of those applications you leverage to move into the public cloud, that you spend time thinking about, you spend time leveraging your partner relationships to understand how they're doing it, or your sister organizations in state and local and higher education. So there's lots of people to talk to about this stuff at this stage, which is exciting, because that means that we can all get better at it. You know, none of us, including ourselves at Sierra-Cedar, we're not in the business of repeating, you know, issues that we've seen in the past, right? We are always in a learning mode, and all of you I know are in a learning mode as well. And it's very much kind of a joint ecosystem as we migrate applications and technology into public cloud, and we're all learning together. But it's very exciting times. All right, the next slide talks about auto scaling. So this is another one of those concepts that I'm probably not going to do justice to in a quick call like this, but I'm going to try. And essentially what auto scaling is, it's first, you know, it sounds like it's strictly about scaling, but it's really not. Really what it is, it's about bringing a cloud native function like scaling, right? So like creating additional application servers for PeopleSoft if you need them, or taking it or creating additional web servers if you need them, right? That's the general concept of scaling. But it takes it beyond that. What it actually does is it takes that one function that we want to think about is scaling, right? So if I need to scale something, if I need to add a web server, add an application server, what I need to do is I need to take an action, right? And with public cloud, number one, I can automate that action. So I can take an action and say, okay, I need to spin up 3 web servers. Here's my code to do it. I'm going to write that code that says, here's how you spin up 3 servers. And then here's how you validate that those servers are stood up. Okay, so that's, you know, kind of the process I would go through. But now with auto scaling within AWS, it allows you to take it so much further. And here's what I mean by that. So not only can you take that same code I just mentioned, right, where you tell the system essentially how to scale up a particular tier of the application, but you can use that same code now for healing the application. So if something breaks in a PeopleSoft architecture today, or any sort of architecture today, a human typically has to go in, figure out what's wrong, you know, kill the process, you know, fix it, right? Well, now you can use the same code you use for scaling to just say, you know what, AWS, if I've got an error in this particular part of the application, don't even fix it. Just kill it and start up a new one, right? That's called auto healing. And auto healing leverages the same concept as auto scaling. It's identical, all right? So same code, same scale. Also with an application like PeopleSoft, you have a scenario with big scaling events. So let's say You know, for higher education, you have enrollments and registrations. For financials, you might have month-end close. For human resources, you might have, you know, annual open enrollments. You have periods of time when you have a large amount of users in your system at once. In those situations, you leverage something called scheduled scale. And for PeopleSoft, the reason you do that is the application, though built, I would say, very much for cloud, doesn't scale that well at large volumes because the application needs to rebuild its cache, it has to load balance its web server, it's got to do all kinds of technical things in the background that it needs time to do itself. It has nothing to do with AWS. It has something to do just with how PeopleSoft works. So in a scheduled scaling event, if I need to go from 1,000 users coming into the system to 10,000, you know what? I can now tell AWS, hey, I need 10,000 users, so scale up this amount of infrastructure. You hit a button, and guess what? It leverages the exact same code that you used and you developed that you did for auto scaling. Okay, so auto scaling as a technology can be leveraged for, you know, adding 10% of infrastructure here and there, so kind of scaling on the fringes. It can be leveraged for auto healing, and it can be leveraged for scheduled scaling. So again, really exciting cloud native features that are leveraged by you can take advantage of if you replatform the application. So you tinker it, leveraging cloud native technologies, and then you leverage infrastructure as code capabilities wherever possible. If you do that, this is very, very real scenario for you, and it works very well. We see this every day with our clients. Okay, with respect to backup and recovery, and by the way, we're getting through our slides here. We'll be done shortly here. But with respect to backup and recovery, the only thing I wanted to mention here for you is it's very different in public cloud. The concept of disaster recovery really goes away. Okay, let me say that again. Disaster recovery as a concept pretty much goes away. What it's replaced with is essentially auto redundancy within these public clouds. And so essentially the way you design them is you design them with application servers and web servers running in multiple regions. And then you design the database side, especially if you leverage cloud native technologies and you use a technology in AWS such as RDS, which is the relational database service, to again run in multiple zones, right? So you have one application running in multiple places. Now, as an organization, if you said, okay, that's great, but I need to test that, you got a problem. Because, you know, if done right within these public cloud environments, if you take something down, let's say you take down an application server, you take down a web server to simulate a disaster recovery scenario, if designed properly, the public cloud environment is going to start it right back up, or it's going to start it up in a different zone, right? So they're designed to handle these kind of interruptions of service behind the scenes. So it becomes actually quite difficult to actually create a true disaster recovery scenario. Now, you can test things. You can test bringing down a database, and you can do some other things that we can, us and other people that have done this type of work can help you with and educate you on. But disaster recovery is handled very differently. Think about it more as a redundant recovery design, and this is something that it's just got to be kind of recognized as the change in migration to cloud. Another design consideration to think about is whether you want applications up all the time, whether you want to bring them down at night or down on the weekends when developers and those types of things aren't using them. All I'm going to tell you on this one is it's a mixed bag. There's some application portfolios that might make sense to shut them down at night, but there's many different ways to handle pricing and pricing constructs in public cloud that can actually make keeping an application up all the time less expensive than shutting it down on the nights or weekends. There's a kind of a middle ground you got to find. So there's, based on the application you're running, there's math that can be done to figure out, all right, what's kind of the best way to do it. You can do it both ways. I'm not saying one way is better than the other. All I'm saying is if anyone tells you one way is the only way, be skeptical. This is public cloud. There's lots of different choices you have, and that's great, right? You have choices here on how to handle costs and control costs, but this is an option for you. Always on, shutdowns, lots of different ways to handle cost controls from that perspective. Next slide is talking about a improved patching experience. AWS enables you to get to a, and I won't say AWS is the only cloud that does this. Other clouds might enable some parts, pieces and parts of this as well. But AWS enables you to do blue-green, which is kind of the goal that we've always been trying to get to as managed services organizations. I've told you we've been doing this type of work for 20 years. This is the first time we can actually patch without bringing systems down, which is amazing. This is like, we've been trying to get to truly for the last, probably for the last 20 years. It's available today with public cloud environments. So now you can, for most things, you can patch the infrastructure, and you can bring and you can update your infrastructure without even bringing PeopleSoft down, which is a pretty incredible thing. There's still things you got to bring PeopleSoft down for patching. I mean, we're never going to get away from that because it's PeopleSoft, because some of the components are not all completely web enabled, but you get pretty darn close, and it's a pretty exciting thing. And this is definitely something that you should be looking at when thinking about moving your applications into public cloud. All right, a couple more slides and we're done here, folks. So get those questions ready, get them rolling in if you have them. With respect to compliance, what I wanted to tell you here is that the beauty of public cloud, and AWS certainly, is that there are a lot of different ways to track what's happening in your environment. You get a whole new set of controls right out of the box with AWS. They are constantly rolling out new features in terms of what's tracked, how it's tracked, where we can feed the data. And we personally feed data to our customers into Splunk environments, into other log aggregators. There's data we alarm on within the actual AWS environments themselves. There's a lot of different lessons learned that you'll go through when making this cloud journey, but the beauty is you can automate it, you can orchestrate it, and you can build events off of different things that you see happen within your environment. So, for example, if you have, from a firewall perspective, if you set as an administrator, you say, okay, here's the different firewall rules that I want to have available in our environment. Essentially, this thing can talk to that thing can talk to this thing, etc. If I go out and open up a rule that allows thing A to talk to thing C that wasn't allowed, you can set these infrastructures up so it shuts that down. And then it sends a ticket off to your administrator to say, FYI, Tim Gehrig opened something up, or Dan Fry opened something up, and I shut it down for you. You might want to go talk to them. So it enables real-time change management and security management within an environment if you leverage cloud-native technologies, and you kind of go through that same process I've been talking about for enablement on replatforming. You can do that with public cloud, and it can take your security controls to a whole new level. And this is something that we see a lot of our clients leveraging and getting a lot of value out of. All right, which brings us back to risk management and guardrails. And with guardrails, the public cloud environment does enable you to put guardrails in most areas. I would not say that moving to the public cloud is always a cost-saving measure. It can be for many organizations. We've got kind of a mixed bag in terms of, whether we see clients saving money with public cloud over kind of traditional infrastructures. It's kind of hit or miss. It really just depends on what type of workloads you're moving. But it absolutely provides you the ability to add guardrails to what you're doing. So from a cost perspective, you can create guardrails to tell you, all right, here's the types of infrastructures I want. You can set the system to say, here's how big I want it to get. And then if it goes outside of the guardrails, it can pull it right back in, right? Cost controls. Same goes for risk controls. Same goes for security controls. All these types of controls that you can build into the environment, you have the ability with public cloud to layer on technology, infrastructure as code technology, to build guardrails around how these systems are run. It gives you a lot more control at a lot more granular level than you have today. These are great wins for public sector, great wins for higher education, and we see them in action every day. All right, I'm just looking at this. So questions. What else can be automated is a good question. Here's something I'm gonna just mention on this. As a managed services organization, we are one of the really neat things about AWS and public cloud is it enables us to get better. So as we see issues with the environment repeat multiple times, right, we're able to then take actions like that now and say, all right, here's an issue we've seen multiple times, and we can build it into automation, right? So we can automate things. Yeah, we have to invest a little bit to make that happen, but we can automate it, and so we can take now actual problems within our customer environments and add new value to them. This is something else that you can develop. So the beauty of the public cloud is once you develop the capabilities to have this, to be cloud native, to understand automation technologies, to understand the concepts of infrastructure as code, it'll take a little bit of time to get there. But again, folks can help you. You're not reinventing the wheel. And once you get there, the additional value that gets added is pretty immense. All right, so key takeaways, and then bring those questions in, guys, if you have them. So from a key takeaway perspective, infrastructure as code and leveraging cloud native technologies when migrating into the public cloud is incredibly important. Definitely want you to spend time and think about that, to educate yourselves. This is one area where service providers like us can help you. We can bring folks in, help train up folks, help establish good center of excellence policies within your AWS environment or in your public cloud environment. And we can help you do that. This is something we do all the time, and it gives you a leg up on getting going. Being flexible in the types of changes that you adopt in your organization is very important. Think differently. Be ready to be challenged. If you're not being challenged and you're getting recommendations to do everything lift and shift, I'm not saying that there's definitely things that can and should be lifted and shifted into public cloud, either from a timing perspective or just from a workload perspective, because it's something that would not design well into public cloud. That will happen. But be skeptical, ask questions. The journey to cloud, I would say, it is a journey. There's a lot of learning that takes place. Just be ready for that. And then the ecosystem continues to evolve. I'd say the things we're talking about today, my experience has been they just get better and better and better as we go forward. And just be ready to keep up with that, or be working with partners and working with constituents in your industries to learn what they're doing. And it's just a constant learning exercise that will not only apply to what you're doing in the ERP, it'll apply to what you're doing within the rest of your infrastructure and applications within your environment. All right, and that's the other slide I mentioned. Lots of things about us in terms of our experience. We have a lot of it. We've been doing this a long time, and we really enjoy the public cloud ecosystem. There's a lot of problems to be solved yet. We love being involved with those. So thank you for that, everybody. All right, with that, if you have any questions, you can bring them up. I'm sure Nancy and Corey will be able to provide information on when this recording will be available, and I turn it back over to you guys for questions or whatever.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have one question that came in, was just asking about the presentation and if it would be available. And it will. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted and available later, and we will send out notice when that is available. Does anybody else have any other questions? Yes, we have another one that just came in. Question is, what are all of the AWS services that would be used to run the PeopleSoft applications in AWS?
Okay, that's a great question, and I don't know if I have enough time to answer it. Here's what I would, and by the way, whoever asked that question, if you want to reach out to someone, definitely glad to get you the answer. I can provide you a complete answer. It's a long list. Here's what I would just say, generally speaking. I actually did this. I have a slide that I developed a long time ago for internal, where we compared all the services and products and technologies that we use in the traditional data center, because we know them well. We run these applications for 40, 50 organizations or more within our environment, right? So we know what it takes to run these applications. So on the right side, I have all those applications and all the different technologies. On the left side, all the technologies and applications we're using for AWS. And I will tell you, I don't think there's one similarity. I think which is both scary and exciting at the same time, because if you're leveraging cloud native services, anytime you leverage a service out versus straight compute out of public cloud, you will typically get value, because these services will add value as part of their delivery, like the AWS RDS database service, right? If you implement that service, not only do you get, you're running your database, but that service can provide you for backup and recovery. It can provide multi-region capabilities. It provides different backup capabilities, all out of the box, right? So, and not only are you using that service to get those features out of the box versus building up let's say, a lift and shift environment where you have something running on a server, you also save money. So it not only is typically going to be less expensive to run a service, but it also adds more value. So there's a whole long list of them, and that list is only getting longer. So whoever asked that question, if you'd like to reach out to Nancy or Corey, we'll get you that answer completely. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question is asking if the slides would be available to print. And I don't know, I mean, you could definitely send those over to us if that's something you're comfortable with us passing on, but I'll leave that up to you.
All right, and then I see I got this questions up. I see another question about.
Yeah, are you okay with me passing on the slides to somebody else for them to print?
I would have no issue with that.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
The question is, would going to AWS be a first step in going to the cloud? A pre-step before going all in to Oracle Fusion or Workday Financials?
So I'll answer this one, and then I'll let Dan jump in if he's got any other thoughts. You know, we see our clients kind of doing a couple things, right? Some of our clients are starting with infrastructure that's not ERP, so not core. They start with kind of the ancillary systems, and they start there, migrate them in, learn, you know, get educated, get staffed up, and kind of go with some of the lower risk applications first, and then deal with kind of a PeopleSoft or a large ERP last. Or we see clients, I should say three methods actually, or we see clients, you know, certainly looking at SaaS as an alternative for the applications that they can look at it as an alternative for. A good example would be things like Kronos or different types of third-party apps that we've seen that used to be in a traditional data center are now available via SaaS, and clients will look at adopting those. For the larger packages, certainly things like Workday or Oracle Fusion are great options as well. And then we have clients that start with ERP. So let's say they decide they're not going to move to a SaaS for the next 4 to 5 years. They're going to wait to see what that develops out. They're looking at us and are looking at their peers as well and saying, okay, how do I move PeopleSoft? Because I need to get some benefit out of cloud now. I need better performance. I need more security. I need a better operational experience, etc. And I want to use this as a momentum item to get there. And I've seen them start with PeopleSoft. So I've seen some start with ERP, some end with ERP, and some certainly go down the path and then take ERP and migrate it into SaaS. So I've seen it all, but it definitely can be a starting point. Dan, anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think what it really comes down to is pain and gain. You know, what pain am I suffering now? What's pushing me to cloud? What's the overall gain that I hope to achieve, and how long does it take me to get there? And that usually tells you where you want to start. It could be a small project to build up confidence. It could be a larger project because I have an immediate pain or immediate gain that I see that I have to take advantage of.
All right. Any other stumpers out there? We'll take them.
One more just came in. Question, we integrate with PeopleSoft HCM in multiple ways. How does migration to an IaaS infrastructure as a software, as a service, AWS impact this?
Wow, another great question. So I will say that so on the very positive side, we have not seen a type of interface yet that has created a challenge in public cloud. But interfaces can be one of the more complicated factors in migration to public cloud. And I'm not talking about the things like FTPs and data movement through, through just normal network protocols, right? What I'm talking about is there's some types of interfaces out there that are a little bit more legacy than others that require file movement and things like that. Some of those types of interfaces you need to spend a little bit of time on and redesign them. And it goes back to that thinking different scenario where you need to really rethink about, all right, what am I trying to accomplish with this interface? And you're then able to kind of think about how you redesign that within public cloud. Again, we've never run into a situation where they've all been solvable, but they can be complex at times. The easy stuff is all of the middleware, the FTPs, the things where you're leveraging like TCP or secure transfer protocols to move data over TCP. Those kinds of things we've dealt with a lot. We've got one client, or potential client, I should say, we're working with right now that might have upwards of 400 plus interfaces, and that's a pretty interesting one. We've certainly had clients to date that have had 100 or 200 interfaces that they've had to migrate over, and with data moving everywhere from AWS to SaaS applications to SOA applications to data, FTP, SFTP type transfers, etc.
Yeah, one thing I'll kind of tack onto that is not necessarily what organizations are doing today with related to integrations, but what will be integrated in the future. So when you move into like an AWS, you've got all kinds of different integration capabilities that you don't have today. So it could be AI, machine learning, Redshift. It could be different data warehousing, data lakes. Could be integration with IoT devices, all kinds of smart sensors. It could be really anything you want to mix and match with. The capability of cloud to run custom code or to run very unique data processing jobs is unparalleled. It's nothing that we have in a traditional data center. So if you look at PeopleSoft today, its capabilities are somewhat finite, but when you start thinking about, well, it would be great if I could mine my student information system in higher education to increase the likelihood of a successful student outcome in a higher ed institution. Or, maybe there's, constituents inside of a state local government where you want to increase your outreach into certain market segments. Those use cases are the use cases of the future. We don't see those today, and you won't get exposed to them until you move to cloud. So I would actually make the argument that it's more imperative to move from a forward-looking standpoint than a legacy standpoint related to integrations.
It's a great point. Yeah, don't be scared of the integrations. Yeah, I mean, it's just another part of your planning that you lay out as part of migration planning, and you test through them. But yeah. Anything else? Definitely great questions, guys. Thank you, and gals, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's all the questions that I do see. As I mentioned, we will send this out afterwards for anybody that was not able to attend. And I thank you guys very much for all of the information you provided today. And we appreciate you hosting our PSUG HCM webinar for February. And if anybody is interested in public sector user group or how to become more involved, please email me or anybody on the board. And with that, I think we're ready to go.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.